Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Today on the Nooner, we're very excited to be joined by Doug Drysdale, CEO of Cybin, and we're excited to dig into what sets them apart in the psychedelic medicine space, where they're headed, and what the broader market, regulatory market, and biotech backdrop means for the industry and for investors right now. For anyone who's out there and wants to join the conversation, a good reminder, as always, you are always welcome to put any questions or comments you have in the chat to try to join the conversation, get some great insight from experts like Doug as we go along in our call today. So with all that said, Doug, thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Mackenzie, good to see you again. Thanks for having us on today.
Yeah, great to have you. So again, I fear it's been a while since you've been on. I know a lot of people are getting interested in the psychedelic space and kind of following what Cybin does, but would love to just start with sort of that quick refresher on Cybin, its mission, and what you're kind of focused on right now before we dig in.
Yeah, of course. So Cybin is a mental health therapeutics company. Our work is focused around synthetic modified psychedelic compounds. We've made a lot of progress since inception, like about 5 years ago. And we've taken some novel molecules that we created to phase 3 in about a 3-year period. That's phase 3 being the last stage of drug development in the US. So we have 2 assets in the clinic today. One is a deuterated version of DMT that is in phase 2 for anxiety disorders. Excitingly waiting for results from that. And the other is a deuterated version of psilocin, which is the active agent in psilocybin, which comes from magic mushrooms, of course. This is a synthetic version that we've modified. We saw some tremendous phase 2 results, and now we're in phase 3 with that asset, which was granted breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA. So lots of exciting progress, and we're really into kind of like the final stretch here, to moving towards a submission in the near future.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Would love to dig just a little bit more into both of those compounds and elements of IP, just sort of what's coming next for them. Like you mentioned, I think that's great to see kind of where they are in sort of the process of approval, but would love to hear kind of what the next steps might be or what people can expect when they're looking at sort of the pipeline for Cybin.
Yeah, so in the near term, CYB4, which is our deuterated DMT asset, is in a phase 2 study for anxiety disorders. We're expecting that study to complete around mid-year this year, mid-year 2025. So eagerly awaiting those initial anxiety efficacy results. For CYB3, which is our lead program, we're in the process of moving through a pivotal phase 3 program. It's quite a large program. The program is called Paradigm. Paradigm consists of 3 studies, 2 short-term studies, 12-week studies, called Approach and Embrace, and then a long-term extension study where we follow patients up for a year after dosing, looking at relapse times, etc. So that phase 3 program is underway. We kicked it off at the end of last year. The first study, Approach, is aggressively screening and enrolling patients. We have 45 sites across the US selected. And the second study, Embrace, we are putting the pieces together of that right now, expected to kick off around mid-year. And that'll include sites in Europe as well.
So a lot of big sort of milestones approaching in 2025, sounds like roughly mid-2025, which must be, again, very exciting from a company perspective, from an investor perspective. Would love to just spend a little bit of time kind of talking through, as you've run these trials, you guys have published some great data and very encouraging data in terms of what these have been able to do for people, whether they're struggling with MPPD or any other sort of related mental health struggle. Can you kind of share just some of the high level results that you've seen as you've been, running these through the trials?
Yeah. So what's really, I think, exciting about these compounds is it's a complete shift in the way we're thinking about treating depression. So we've been treating just the symptoms of depression for the last 40 years or so. So patients take antidepressants, they take them every day, sometimes for years at a time. But the depression's never been cured. If a patient stops taking their antidepressant, the likelihood is that they'll become depressed again. So they're doing nothing. Current treatments are doing nothing to change the course of disease. They're just managing patients, and often, not effectively. With CYB3, deuterated psilocin, in phase 2, we saw after just the second dose, 75% of patients in remission from their depression. So that means that they no longer qualified for, the definition of being depressed after just 2 doses, which is, obviously remarkable. But
Mhm.
when you look at the durability of these effects, and over a period of a year, we saw 71% of patients still in remission a year later. So we're seeing very rapid effects, after just 2 doses, very large effects when you're able to positively impact 75% of the population. That is huge, and to see these effects last such a long time means that we're clearly changing the biology somehow. We're clearly changing the course of disease, because those patients aren't taking any other doses in that 1 year period. They've stopped taking their medication, and they're still operating well. So a really big paradigm shift in how we might treat depression in the future.
You took the words exactly out of my mouth. I was going to say it's not only just sort of a better way to treat, I guess, ultimately these conditions or diseases. It is basically a paradigm shift. It's entirely different from what we've been able to do in the past with kind of more traditional pharmaceuticals, and really has a new way of treating it that seems to be more effective, better, and ultimately, better at treating these things, which makes a difference over time, and also in terms of like a maintenance perspective, like you were mentioning. So that's fantastic to check out those results. Do you have those results in more detail that people can kind of pour through if they're looking into this world kind of for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a corporate presentation and a few other slides and charts on our website, Cybin.com. People can feel free to dig in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. I think, again, there's a lot of education still needed in this space. I think it's attracted a lot of interest and kind of excitement just because the results that we have seen have been so encouraging. But again, I think that there's still a lot of education to kind of come around ultimately on that. So that'll be very helpful. Would love to hear kind of from a company perspective. Obviously, the IP element is very important. I know you are creating these very kind of tailored compounds to be able to treat these things, but also it has an IP element. Would love to kind of hear a little bit more about that element and how that process works ultimately for these types of compounds and treatments.
Well, IP is obviously very important for drug development. Drug development is expensive, and it
Hmm.
takes a long time. And without a very long period of exclusivity with patent protection, it's difficult to secure those investments needed, to go and do the hard work. So IP
Hmm.
has been a central part of our plan from the beginning. It's essential in all of biotech. We have 80 patents granted or so right now, and another 200 or so still pending. So we're still generating IP. We are learning more as we go about these compounds, novel claims that we continue to file. But we're confident around the very significant multi-layered moat that we built around the products that should protect our compounds over the long term, enabling us to have enough time to give a good return, to investors over time.
Yep, I think that's fantastic. Also, shroom sleep. I think some great developments coming through, which is amazing. Speaking of this, would love to actually talk very briefly kind of about the manufacturing agreement that I recently saw that you guys had put up with Thermo Fisher Scientific. Seems like a very big deal. Would love to kind of talk a little bit about, what that means from like an unlocking perspective for Cybin in terms of, scalability, cost efficiency. Would love to kind of hear about it and then kind of the impacts of it.
Yeah, so obviously, when you have a couple of assets with high levels of investment, then securing a long-term manufacturing partner is very important, and it's something we've taken very seriously, and we've been very selective. Thermo Fisher, who we partnered with for CYB3, is, I think, the largest contract manufacturer in pharma. I
Hmm.
think the market cap's around $150 billion, something like that. So a great track record and a strong, financially stable partner, which is what we need when we're thinking about long-term supply here. So the active agent in CYB3 and the finished product, the capsules, manufactured by Thermo Fisher across South Carolina and Ohio. So
Hmm.
US-based manufacturing, which means no issues with delays in importation, no potential issues
Hmm.
with tariffs if anything develops there. So we're very happy with this partnership. We've been working with them for quite some time on the early stages of these compounds, and just thrilled with the work that they've done. It's a really high quality team of people.
That's fantastic. And again, yeah, I ultimately having domestic production normally is important, but not the biggest thing in the world. But with things kind of very much still up in the air on the political side with tariffs and imports and everything like that, that's definitely what you want to see. So that's fantastic. In terms of having such an established company work in the world of psychedelic biotech, do you kind of see that as a vote of confidence in the space? Any sort of thoughts on that element in terms of the partnership?
Yeah, I guess to some extent that's true. In that it's great to see such a large company willing to partner around psychedelics. I guess you could call that validation. But I think they're very professional. They were involved in a lot of drug development programs, and they've seen this, as we have from the beginning, as purely biotech. It's not really about the compounds, what they are, but about developing these treatments for patients. So yeah, I guess at some level it's validation, but great to have them on board.
Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic. I think ultimately, you're right. It is ultimately more biotech in the end, but I do think the psychedelic element can be appealing, I think, and attractive for investors, but I think can set it apart in some way, but also like for the better. But also, I think sometimes it seems a little bit riskier, but ultimately, I think that's not necessarily true. It is ultimately just biotech, which can have, volatility itself. But again, I think is a very familiar thing for investors who are out there and kind of looking. So two kind of ways to look at it, but I think that makes sense. Anything else sort of on the Cybin side that is standing out, interesting? Would love to otherwise kind of jump into kind of the space as a whole and kind of talk about how it's developing, because I think it's had a pretty strong year so far in 2025, and there's been a lot of renewed interest, which has been fantastic to see.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year. I think the industry, the sector, if you want to call it that, as a whole, has obviously matured a lot in the last 5 years. We've seen a lot of consolidation down to now maybe a handful of companies, which is obviously great from a sort of capital efficiency perspective, and not having 60 companies trying to get funding. So that's good. But also this year, I think it's been marked by a vocal, positive shift in views from the administration. So seeing the head of HHS and the head of FDA being vocal about psychedelics is obviously quite exciting to feel that we're on the agenda. And then just to see, for us, a continued engagement with FDA that's been just really tremendous. I mean, we've had great engagement from day one, but it hasn't changed. If anything, it's just gotten stronger over time. We've met with FDA fairly recently, so even amongst all of these sort of noise around FDA cuts, we've seen no slowdown, no change. Very responsive team, very engaging. And when the FDA sends 20 or so people to a meeting, that's a pretty good sign, I think, that they are engaged, and we see people representing many departments at FDA. So I think they're clearly learning here. They're monitoring all of these programs, but so far, we couldn't be more happy with the engagement that we've seen with FDA this year.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I mean, I think even beyond engagement, I would imagine, I know I've seen recent quotes about sort of the prioritization of looking into kind of psychedelic medicine and really trying to invest and kind of bring it to people is, seems very encouraging for the space at large. You mentioned sort of those meetings and kind of having a good amount of people from the FDA kind of being there to ask questions and get education. Are there any sort of like themes that are emerging from kind of the types of questions they're asking? Do you see any sort of progression in terms of their base of knowledge kind of growing over time? Anything kind of on that side that might be interesting to know?
Well, I think it has changed over time, and we've seen some of that, haven't we, in how FDA has interacted with Lycos, for example, around their MDMA submission. It's clear that between Lycos's early IND approval back in, I think, the early 90s, and today, FDA's view has shifted and matured and developed. We've seen them proactively put out guidance on how to run psychedelic clinical trials. I think that's great to see. But I would say that our last several interactions with them have been pretty consistent. I think they've done a lot of work in this area. They're obviously dealing with a number of different programs, not just maybe the half a dozen public companies, but a number of smaller private companies too that are doing early work. There's a lot of psychedelic INDs open. So they're learning as they go, but it seems to me that they're getting, each time we interact, they're more comfortable with what they're looking for and what they want. And I think they've been pretty public about that as well.
That's fantastic. All right, I would love to turn to a question that I'm seeing coming through, kind of speaking about sort of the current administration and how it all ties into biotech ultimately. But Shannon is asking, how are you viewing the proposed pharma price controls for Cybin / the industry as well? I do think it's hard sometimes with some of these proposals ultimately that the administration is coming out, because it's hard to tell if they happen or don't happen ultimately, but would love sort of your high-level thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know if those most favored nations type proposals will ever really make it into law. I think as they're written right now, they appear to be pretty hollow, frankly. With any pharmaceutical market, the US is typically about 50% of the global market. With these compounds, given what we've seen in psychiatry and in other countries, especially in Europe, it's likely that the value of these compounds is maybe 75% in the US and less so in other countries. Look, I do think that the goal of these moves to try to encourage European countries to pay their fair share of R&D that's really funded by US employers and consumers. That's the right goal. I don't think that this particular way that we're seeing going about it is going to become law. It's likely to be a negotiating tactic to try and make those countries step up. So right now we're very much US focused. We will be running some of our Embrace phase 3 sites in Europe as well. So we're making sure we're staying on top of things there. And we'll keep watching as this policy unfolds. But I think, as we've seen in the past, it's difficult to enact these kinds of price controls outside of Medicare, Medicaid, frankly.
Yep, that's true. And additionally, I do think, like you're saying, historically, I think what we've seen a lot of the time has been more negotiating tactic than kind of what it is at face value. So I think that's important to keep in mind. So that's very interesting. Appreciate. I see Stevie's comment on the stock having a great day today, which is great to see. Would love to kind of turn it to kind of the investor perspective as people are looking into the psychedelic space, Cybin in particular. Would love to hear just sort of what we've seen this year in terms of interest with sort of a lot of the headlines and a lot of the administration more broadly being very pro psychedelic. Have we sort of started to see that pickup in interest in psychedelics, or is it something that you think we see kind of as we head through the year, ultimately?
No, I think there has been renewed confidence in the work that we're doing because of some of the comments from the administration. I think the science has been settled for quite some time. I think it's been quite a while now that there's sort of general acceptance that psychedelic compounds have efficacy. So we know that they work. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do to design differentiated compounds and protocols and dosing regimens and patient populations like we've done at Cybin. We very much focus on differentiation, but there's still that question of will we see approvals and will the general public accept these compounds? And I think each time we hear encouraging comments from the administration, from RFK Jr., from Marty McCary, and others, I think it goes a long way to kind of dispel any concerns that there might be any regulatory issues. I don't see that this administration is going to put up any unnecessary barriers to psychedelic drug development. So to have that on top of your already very positive FDA environment, I think is terrific.
Yeah, and I think generally, there seems to be more acceptance, or at least level of comfort with patients, ultimately, people who are just, looking for options to help treat a disease, treat a mental health concern towards psychedelics. Maybe they're not ready to yet take the step, but I think that there are a lot of people that we are seeing, and I know it was just Memorial Day here in the US, and I know there's, a ton of veterans who do deal with major depressive disorder and other things that I think are treated often by psychedelics. And I think ultimately we just kind of, I think, see renewed interest there, in addition to, like you're saying, a lot of the regulatory and sort of administration supports, which I think are very, very important, of course. But I think all around it seems like there's a larger embracing, which is great. From an
Yeah,
investor perspective,
maybe
sorry.
just to say that there's obviously a piece of the population, a portion of the population that is excited about these compounds. Certainly, there's
Mhm.
a strong awareness among the veteran community, and there are many other advocacy groups that are excited about this. We talk to clinics and psychiatrists frequently; they're excited about these options because for the first time, they can actually change the course of disease. So I don't want to come across as being negative, just to be realistic,
Mhm.
while you have this piece of the population that may be early adopters, which is fantastic, we've also got a large part of the population, maybe a little older, who've been told for 70 years that these treatments are bad and they're dangerous. So
Mhm.
there's definitely still some education and some communication work to do, as with any new launch.
Mhm.
But I think we've got some really positive momentum going into that.
Yeah, definitely agree. In terms of the sort of that education or addressing that level of comfort, do you think that just comes from kind of putting it into a familiar sort of healthcare related sort of vein rather than something that's more recreational? I know a lot of people are looking, probably more of those early adopters or people who are really in dire need are looking to kind of take things recreationally to just try to address the problem, but having it in that more tested, FDA approved sort of bucket or treatment. Do you think that's ultimately that helps, or do you think it's more sort of reading about it, more sort of the studies? What are things that will kind of help
I mean,
build that trust?
all of the above, but definitely the stamp of approval by the FDA, the
Yeah.
prescription from your doctor that you trust, the reimbursement by your insurance company, having these treatments fit within a well-known, tried and tested system that people are familiar with, is going to go a long, long way. I think to bring many of those sort of more cautious patients into the fold. But we're already seeing, as we talk to clinics, they tell us that patients are calling in and inquiring about these treatments and when they could be available. So there's definitely going to be some early demand as we come to market.
That's fantastic. Again, great to hear. I think just from, obviously a company perspective, but great to hear that people are looking at other options that potentially can really help them and make a real impact in their life. So I think great from both perspectives there. I guess sort of just looking forward to the rest of 2025. I know there's more beyond that, but would love to kind of get your take on what are sort of the big milestones or catalysts or things that you should be kind of, or investors should be kind of keeping an eye on, or people who are interested in psychedelics as a medicine as well. Would love to just sort of hear high level what you're looking at, what's on your radar as we are heading into 2025.
Yeah, look, I think as we continue to see positive studies, larger studies being published from commercial sponsors, and each time one of those happens, it continues to just reinforce the validity of the work that we're doing, and I think increases the probability of ultimately successful approval and launch. I think this year, I think there's all eyes are probably on the Compass phase 3 TRD data coming up. I think we all want to see a positive outcome there, and I wouldn't expect anything other than that, really, based upon their positive phase 2 results. I think we'd all like to see as a sector clarity around Lykos's path forward. I'm sure by now they're well underway with a plan with FDA to go to next steps. And then for us, of course, as I mentioned,
Yep.
we're excited about our GAD, generalized anxiety disorder study that'll
Mhm.
complete around mid-year. That's another great to have another compound with efficacy data. And the team is very much sort of heads down at the moment, scaling from phase 2 to phase 3, ramping up enrollment in our approach study, and getting ready to launch Embrace. We are talking about hundreds of investigators, hundreds of facilitators being trained, DA licenses across all of these sites. It's a big logistical lift, and the team is doing a terrific job. So yeah, quite an interesting, exciting year ahead for us.
Yep, I think very exciting for the space, very exciting for Cybin. So again, really appreciate you taking some time to kind of walk us through, give us some more insight and information. Would love, I know again, the space demands a lot of education and sort of more insight. So would love to hear kind of where people who are interested in the psychedelic space, biotech space, or who are investors who are trying to learn more, where they can kind of get more information, follow along, where are the best spots that you would kind of point people to?
Yeah, look, I think for the sector overall, Psychedelic Alpha does a good job of summarizing a lot of the relevant news and IP landscape. So that's always a good tool. If you're looking and interested in learning more about Cybin and our trials and the work that we're doing, or even being a part of a study, then cybin.com is the place to go.
That's fantastic. All right. Again, Doug, really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Everyone, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. We hope you found this helpful, and we will catch you next time. Thanks so much again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.